Hi, everybody. Welcome to this month's Sharing Hope Community Conversations. My name is Nyemade. I am a volunteer with NAMI Delaware. And I'm so excited to have another great conversation with everybody. This month, we are talking about child abuse awareness and prevention because April is Child Abuse Awareness Month. So it's a little bit more of a touchy subject at times, but this is definitely a safe space. We have some great guests to lend their insight, and everyone who is joining us for this Zoom is invited to participate as well. Please know that this is not a support group, and this does not take the place of going to see a therapist or anything like that, but it's just a space for us to get together and talk about different topics. And today, our special guest will be Senator Marie Pinkney. She works in trauma, correct, Senator Pinkney?
I did. I do not anymore. I work part-time at the hospital now, so I just do regular floor-based case management, but I do spend 3 years in trauma.
In trauma, yes. I didn't want to mess up the title for you. And then we also have Niagia Williams. She works with Prevent Child Abuse Delaware, correct? Yes. I'm so excited to have them join. On right now as well, we also have the situational therapist, Derek. I recently did an IG live with him on the topic of child abuse and spanking and things, so I asked him to join us as well. And then we have a few other people off camera also, Jill is on camera, so I'm going to introduce you as well. Jill is actually the founder of NAMI Delaware. So it's great to have her on with us. All right, so as we get started on this conversation, also to let you know that the Delaware Crisis handout is available in the chat if you need it, if the conversation gets too serious, or even if you know someone who might need the resource that is available for you. So to start off with, I want to talk about what is child abuse. People have different definitions of it. Some of us think that there's just one. So I'm going to start with you, Niagia. In your field where you work, what type of child abuse cases or what qualifies as child abuse?
So we do not do direct service. We are more of we do training. And so we do training on recognizing and responding child abuse and neglect. And so when it comes to child abuse, we really talk about the 4 types of child abuse that are well known: physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and then also neglect. I usually, when I'm given the definition, I try to give more of the definition, like just a very plain definition, because it can entail so many different things. So usually when we talk about physical abuse, we say that physical abuse is when a child is being hit to the point where there are bruises and marks being left on their body, black eyes, broken bones, cuts, burns, things like that. Emotional abuse is when someone is using words to hurt a child, saying mean, hurtful things, things that no child should ever have to hear, especially from the grown-up that is supposed to be taking care of them. Neglect is when a child is not being taken care of, not getting the basic needs met. Food, clothes, a safe place to live, someone who's making sure that they are being supervised, going to sleep at night, things like that. And then sexual abuse is anything really for sexual abuse. It kind of goes back and forth, but sexual abuse is anything dealing with the private places of a child, whether it's touching, looking, someone saying things about that child, making about their body, making them feel uncomfortable, or someone saying things about their body to make that child feel uncomfortable. When it comes to sexual abuse, there's hands-on sexual abuse, but then there's also hands-off sexual abuse. And sometimes people don't think of the hands-off sexual abuse and the impact that it does have on a child, but it definitely does have an impact. With the 4 types of child abuse, sexual abuse is probably the only one that's, like, as far as like DFS is concerned, sexual abuse is the only one that could be a relative of the child or someone who's not a relative of the child. For physical abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect, it's usually the caregiver that's doing it, and when it's called abuse. You're muted.
So with sexual abuse, it's always a family member, you
No,
said?
I'm sorry. I get, so for sexual abuse, it doesn't matter if it's a person in the family or someone outside of the family.
Okay.
It's considered sexual abuse. But for the other three, it's only when it's a relative or the person who's the caregiver of the child that it's considered abuse. So for example, if Mr. Joe down the street hits a child, spanks them, leaves bruises and marks on their body, that's not something that DFS would deal with. That's not a DFS child physical abuse problem. But if his dad does the same thing, then that would be considered physical abuse.
Okay, got it.
So if
For the
Mr.
terms
Johnny
of
down the street touches, his a child's private places, that's sexual abuse. If his dad does it, that's sexual abuse.
Got it.
Am I being clear?
Yeah, no, I understand it better that way. And when we talk about the trauma of abuse, no matter where it comes from, it's trauma for a child. Something that I think is interesting that you mentioned is that, physical abuse is when it's to the point of bruising, because a lot of times we'll talk about like, oh, spanking and discipline versus like physical abuse. But then we talk about emotional abuse and how that impacts the child. And I feel that even if there's no bruising, there's an emotional impact on the child when you're spanking them. So you're still crossing over that line into emotional abuse, even if it's not physical abuse. And once you get into abuse, then it definitely has a mental impact. And Derek, if you don't mind me asking you, what are some of the mental impacts of that physical abuse, even if it's not to the point of bruising?
Right. And just for everyone who doesn't know, I'm Derek, situational therapist, a licensed marriage and family therapist. And the crazy thing about it is, like, we truly don't know. We don't know. We can't design a study to test and see what the one-to-one effects of spanking children are. Because if we did, we'd literally have to create a study where we were hitting children. It's impossible to do. There's no way to ethically design this study. So in my practice, what I see, the mental health things of it, but even still, not ethically design the study, the research that we get from it is correlational, right? What we found though, over and over and over again, is that it causes all sorts of everything: anxiety, depression, fear of trying new things, making mistakes. Like, it can't be understated. And I actually wrote down, whenever I heard the person, Niagia, I don't mean to mispronounce your name, I'm so bad at names. But when you were saying that, like, one of the criteria for abuse was whenever they're hit and not leaving bruises, that stood out to me too. Like, you don't have to leave a bruise for it to leave a mental mark. Like, you have a child that is completely and totally dependent upon their caregiver for their existence, being placed in a situation where they have to lie to themselves constantly. This person is telling me that they hit me for my own good and they do it because they love me, and that it hurts me more than it hurts them. I feel pain. I feel like they're lying to me. That is how as a child, how are you supposed to process that information? Right. So it's so much deeper than that. It's so much deeper than that, because and then I'll let it go, but it's more about the way the parent sees that child and then how the child sees themselves because of it. And any parent, in my opinion, that can look at their child and engage in that behavior, they have to not be thinking of them in order to hit them and cause them physical pain. And so what do we see? We see it increases aggression, failed relationships, inability to trust others, inability to trust themselves. It's just, there's a laundry list. There's a laundry list.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely plays into various parts of their lives. And Senator Pinkney, I wanted to ask you a little bit more too about what you see on the trauma end, coming into the hospital as well. But I know you had your hand off. You wanted to say something about what Derek said. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off of the idea of, like, we don't know the long-term effects, right? He's so right in that the outcomes can be so varying. It can, in one abused child, they can go out and become someone who is overly aggressive. The next abused child can become somebody who's overly trusting. Like the ends of the spectacle that our possible outcomes are just so impossible to predict. So what you look at in one child whose behaviors may look like a cry for help, you might have the next child who's a straight A student, never does anything to upset anybody, walks on eggshells to make sure that they are helping everybody else in the world. You never know what the outcomes are going to be, because there's so many just different psychological outcomes that can result from abuse, right? And also, like Derek said, is that it becomes then a tricking of the mind. Like, was I worthy of these behaviors? Did I do something to deserve these behaviors? Or I know I don't deserve these behaviors. This person is a bad person. I'm never going to trust anybody. There's no way to tell what the outcomes are going to be, because they're so vast and they differ from child to child, that then turns into differing from adult to adult who didn't get to heal from that trauma. But in terms of what we see in the hospital, so I spent a few years working in acute trauma, meaning like right after some form of an accident happens to a child, they come, or I typically worked with adults in that setting, but like right after an accident happens, they would come into the hospital after the emergency. So they would come in, they would get stabilized in the emergency room, and then they would come into the ICU, which is where I worked. So it's very infrequent that we would see children in that space, unless their injury was so severe that they couldn't make it to AI, that they had to come to the closest hospital. And Christiana has the only level 1 trauma center in the hospital. So I can't say, thankfully, I cannot say that I ever saw abuse in that setting, but some of the things that I think that you can look at, right, or see are just from reading that I've done on this topic, is like you'll see frequent flyer children who constantly have like broken bones, or constantly have just multiple incidents. So the parent might be bringing the child in, and it might look like the child is a clumsy child, but in reality, these are the children coming in as a result of injuries that were sustained in the home. And that's another kind of insidious part of this, is that you then have the parent who is finding ways to manipulate their behaviors and the verbiage of their behaviors, and that further is then confusing the child, because the child then has to lie to cover up for their parent. And one of the things that we know, and one of the things that I saw when I did work with teens, is that it does not matter what these babies go through with their parents. They want to defend their parents. They want their families to stay together. And so they will tell the story that the parents tell them to tell. They will figure out how to keep their parent from being in trouble, because that is your parent. And no matter how confusing that relationship then becomes, this is your parent. This is someone that in your DNA, you are supposed to love them, and you cannot find it in you, or it takes a long time to find it within you to recognize that this is someone that is doing you harm.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be the hardest part, is that person, and I think you touched on it, Derek touched on it, the person that's teaching you and showing you love is abusing you. And it's so easy, and we've had conversations here before about domestic violence. It's easy to say that a grown man hitting a grown woman to show her discipline is wrong, but somehow we think that it's okay, to do so with children. Marilyn said something great in chat, which is that the experience of fear, a threat, can create toxic stress and impacts the way the central nervous system understands relationships. And yeah, I think that goes back to that as well. You're starting them from a young age, changing the way they see and think about relationships and what's positive and what's not. And I think one of the hardest things when we talk about abuse is really that fine line, right? Like we can all, if we see a parent like punch a kid or beat them, like that is abuse, that we see that as abuse. But what do you do when you want to, when you see it on a lighter note, like a spanking, but that's still abuse. Or even speaking to children, if a parent or someone is out and out saying harmful, awful things to a child, it's easy to say like they're being emotionally and verbally abusive. But what about like the jokes that we know are going to impact their mental health later? I think that's one of the hardest things when we talk about abuse, is how to recognize it and also address it on the level when we don't see it as being as big of a deal, if that makes sense. So Nigel, like what are some, do you in your space talk about prevention or ways to interact with people if you calling it out, I guess, if you see it?
We do not on a large scale, like we don't have a class or anything like that, but we do address the fact that, how do you deal with it, or what do you say? And to Derek's point, like we do say you don't have to wait until you're seeing bruises and marks on the child's body to intervene, to say something, to feel like, hey, this is not okay. So we do say, tell people, it's okay to address it before it becomes something that needs to be addressed, by the authorities or DFS or the police or something like that. So when we do a program called Stewards of Children, and this child sexual abuse prevention program, and in that program it talks about how to, and it talks about specifically for sexual abuse, but it really could be for any type of abuse, but how you intervene. And it's really about just stating what is being done and what the problem is, and then saying what should be done and moving on. Like, you don't want to put the child in a position, like if you're going to say something to the adult while the child is there, you don't want to put the child in a position, like Senator Pinkney said, where they feel like they have to defend this adult who they love and they care about. So it's just saying something like, it seems, and I'm going to go from a sexual abuse potential sexual abuse. So it seems like she's uncomfortable with the game that you're playing. Please, put her down, let her go and play. And then maybe later on going to that person and addressing them. And just, again, getting people to understand that, children, they have the right to say what's okay and what's not okay when it comes to their body. A lot of times people feel like, oh, they're a child, give me a hug. It's like, no. You should ask permission of that child to give them a hug, to touch their body. It's not just, okay, I can do whatever I want because you're a child. And so it's important for kids to hear that. And it's important for adults to hear that. Within my own family, I've had to, have that conversation where, you don't just go up and, grab him or pick him up and things like that. No, get permission. It's important to get permission. And so, like, little things like that you can say and kind of get into people's head to kind of get them to see the overall importance of it, so that way, hopefully they'll decrease some of those behaviors and not, continue to just do whatever, whenever, however they want.
I agree. And it's hard sometimes because we've all been so programmed to do certain things, and like that's just how it is in certain areas. And so even something like grabbing a kid and forcing them to give you a hug, even if they're like, no, I don't want to, it's like, oh, we all do it, they're just kids, it's whatever. And I feel like it's only recently that we've been talking about body autonomy, and as Senator Pinkney mentioned in the thing, having agency over their bodies. Do you mind speaking about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Nyemade. So I think that one of the things that we forget is that so much of our personalities and who we are to become is formed in childhood. So when we don't teach children so that they are allowed to say no, and they're allowed to mean it when they say no, and that they have no shame in saying no, they carry that throughout adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And I one of the things that I think is particularly interesting, and this is purely anecdotal, but I think it would be interesting to correlate a study on children, not on children, but to correlate the when children are taught to say no, and how that later correlates to how they respond in what may become sexual situations of consent, and how they learn to consent later in life. So when a parent tells their child, oh, just give Aunt Bibi a hug. That's Aunt Bibi. She gonna kiss you with all that wet kiss all on your cheek. It's fine. She loves you. And we see that baby does not want Aunt Bibi to kiss her, but we're making her, so she collapses into it, or the child collapses into it. They learn to just accept it. What does that do later when there is, and it does not even have to be an inappropriate age range relationship. It can be what would have the potential to be a healthy consenting relationship if they were taught that it is necessary to give consent and to receive consent. And if we are teaching children that their consent doesn't matter in such a tender age as this little baby sitting on Miss White's lap, if we are teaching her at that age that you have the right to say no, what is that going to do when she is 16 years old and she does not want that boy down the street to kiss her? And it's not because he's a bad looking kid. It's not because he's a terrible person. That's just not who she wants touching her. And she is allowed to say that. She is allowed to project that. And what that does for a child's confidence as well, to know that it is okay to say no, to mean it, and you're not a bad person for saying it.
Yeah.
You are a healthy, consenting adult that is learned in childhood. But because we don't see anything wrong with it, or because, to take it even further, because we as adults tend to think that we are always in the right and that we know what's best, we use our voices to overpower and overshadow children who know what they want. That baby knows she don't want Aunt BB to kiss her because she don't want them wet lips on her cheek. And it's okay for her to not want those wet lips on her cheek. And we should be encouraging her as a child, as a young child, to say, I don't want that kiss, Aunt BB. I love you. You make the best cookies, Aunt BB. But I just don't want them wet lips. No foul, no harm. That's me taking agency over myself as a child, because even children are able to tell us, whether it's through words or behaviors or actions, they're able to tell us what they want and need. We just have to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And no, Derek said in the chat, no is a complete sentence. And that's absolutely true. I think that study would be interesting because I know for me, growing up, it was very hard for me to just like let go of feeling guilt when I said no, or like I was doing something wrong when I said no. Even though my mom, like, she did encourage us to think and things like that for ourselves, which is good because I have good critical thinking skills, but there's still like very much a level of like, you listen to your parent, you listen to your elder. So like anyone older than me or in a position of power above me, it's always been, and even now I still struggle with it, with being like, because so much of that was instilled at a younger age. And actually, I invited Ms. Kame on the call as well. I recently spoke with her about mental health, and she, because I'm Liberian, and she actually grew up in Nigeria, and it's prevalent across a lot of different areas where you have to listen to your parents, and also spanking, but especially in the African, or at least to my knowledge, like the West African community, like that's very strict, like no talking back. Spanking is a prevalent thing. And I think that really impacts it. And they definitely don't see it as abuse in that culture. It's just discipline. So if you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit about that, Ms. Kame, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, thank you for inviting me. This is so sudden. I wish, I knew that before, but thank you so much, because you are so right. Part of the culture, mostly in West African countries, is that a child should be seen, not heard, whereby the idea of expressing your innermost thought and feelings is not really appreciated. So it's part of why I started a conversation within African immigrant community and their children to understand some of the challenges that a lot of our youth are going through in this country, because culturally people bring culture as an immigrant from different parts of the world, and they instill that on their children here in the United States, a country whereby you have to be able to express yourself. You have to be able to express your innermost thoughts. To the extent a child cannot look up at the adult straight in the eye and express how they feel about things. So most in African homes is to be able to tell the children, this is what I want you to do. You follow through that and don't ask any question. Sometimes children are being threatened that if you don't want to listen to me, you want to act like the dominant culture, whereby children are allowed to just say no and tell their parents whatever they want, I will send you back to Africa. To the extent sometimes some of these kids become so silent and they suffer so much in silence. I remember holding an event whereby I had a group of, about 6 of our first generation who were born here or brought here at a very young age. And they were sitting down in the panel, not only from Nigeria, from Cameroon, from Congo, different part of Africa anyway. So one of the young men talked about how much he was going through so much pressure in school from classmates, even, being bullied. And his parents has to tell him that you just have to adapt. I don't want to hear anything from you. And if you don't behave yourself, we're sending you back to Gambia. To the extent this young man felt like when you send a child to Africa, is a place for punishment.
Mm.
So he kept so much on the inside. And he said he also contemplated of committing suicide, and nobody would listen to him, not even a family friend, not member of the community that he could have reached out to listen to some of his innermost thoughts, what he was struggling with. He said nobody was listening to him because all what he wanted to do is just to be the best they can so that they don't have to send him back home. And what many of these parents are not understanding is that America is a different society whereby is actually embraced to express yourself, and is also affecting our children academically, even in a job environment, whereby they don't feel like they have to say anything. They have to express when they've been unfairly treated.
Yeah, and did you face? Okay, yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, it really does play into how you go ahead in the future and how you walk through life. So Derek, I want to ask you from the therapist viewpoint, how do you start to unpack that if because we've talked a little bit about the childhood and child abuse, but like now we're moving on to teenage years and adult years. How do you start to undo some of the trauma that you've taken on because you either had someone who never let you speak, so now you feel like you have to be silent, or you view abuse as love because you've been abused? Like, how do you start to work to unpack that?
Yeah. And so the first thing I tell all of my clients is this is going to be extremely difficult because what I have to change is the way you see yourself and the way you perceive the world. That's why I came up with the situational therapist. You have to start looking at life situations differently. Like, I know for me as a survivor of abuse, one thing I'm always terrified of all the time is I'm worried about what's the next worst thing that's going to happen. In every single situation I'm in, I'm always thinking, what is the worst possible thing that could happen here? Because that's from childhood. I knew that if I got in trouble, my mom was going to punish me. And so I need to make sure that I think perfectly and do everything okay and straight like I'm supposed to so that I don't get in any trouble. And so I still have that to this day. So I don't want there to be any misconceptions about this work. It is hard and it will take a long time depending on the severity and how much you got whipped. At least I can remember my mom was kind of on a cycle. Everything will be fine Monday through Wednesday. Wednesday, she'd go to church, get riled up by the pastor. Thursday, she'd work a 12-hour shift. Friday, she'd be mad because the house wasn't clean. Saturday, she would whip us. Sunday, she'd go to church. She'd feel bad about it, apologize, and then the whole cycle would start all the way over. But most people aren't that lucky. They don't have that luxury to have their parents' whipping schedule out. That's how my mind works. I was looking for patterns, and that's why I'm so good at finding them now. And so that's the other side of this, is I help them see you have an amazing attention to detail. If you grew up being spanked, you have an amazing attention to detail because you were always paying attention and looking for what can I do to protect myself in this situation? And so to start unpacking that, I just have to normalize so much stuff. It's okay that you feel every single diagnosis in the DSM can be explained by kids getting spanked when they were kids. You can't not convince me of that. I will fight you on that all day. Every single one of them, I will fight you on it. Because I go to the grocery store, I feel anxious when I want to get fruit when I'm looking. That's because when I was younger, my mom would always rush me in those situations and say, hurry up. So I'd have to hurry up and have fun, or hurry up and take my time. It's just all these double messages. And so I sit and I listen to my clients as they gain my trust, and they just tell me things that happen. And I have to say things like, no, it wasn't normal that your parents made you kneel on peas. That wasn't normal. That wasn't okay. No, it wasn't all right for your mom to go make you get the switch, but you waste money on the $6,000 couch. Why didn't your mom have a couch cover? Why didn't dad have the stuff locked away? Why it's not your fault? Like, I could help so many people so quickly if I could just convince them they didn't deserve their abuse. My job would be easy. That's 90% of my job.
I think that's the hardest part, is because on some level you do think you deserve it. And even as you get older and get in abusive relationships, it's because you think people will stay in them because for some level they think that they deserve that treatment. I remember one of my best friends was having issues with her husband. I was like, why do you let him treat you like that? And she finally was like, because on some level I feel like I deserve it, which was heartbreaking to me. But I'm sure that that's the truth, and that's what keeps a lot of people in relationships like that. There was a comment in here. I wanted to pull it back up. Oh, and Marie, or Senator Pickens said that you learn to dislike your own culture. And that's true. I think that when you use your culture as a form of punishment, then it teaches your brain to think like, oh, this is a bad thing. I know for me, sometimes church would be used as that. Like if I was bad, I'll tell the priest and love to pray for you. So I'm like, okay. But it's also interesting how many things from your childhood, you don't even realize how much it impacts you. Like Derek, when you were saying like attention to detail or being hyper aware of stuff because of spanking, like I've always been hyper vigilant. Like I'm just always in a state of like tension, like what will go wrong, like, and I'm ready, which is great. Like if you have an emergency situation, I'm your girl. I'll have a panic attack after, but in the moment I will be on it and I will get it done. So, you know, kudos, I guess, but part of that is from childhood and from different things, just having to know to like be on point with that. And trying to break that down and get away from that can be difficult. I think right now, because we don't want to record the whole thing so more people can speak if they'd like. But before we end the recording, I would like to talk just a little bit we have a comment from Lisa really quick. I was always belittled by my mother, my size, my way of thinking, my clothes. I had very low opinion of myself and was in an abusive relationship and put up with things I should not. It took me 52 years to figure it out. Yeah, and that happens a lot because a lot of time, like if you from childhood are raised thinking this is how people show love and this is the way you deserve to be treated, obviously your next relationship, it's fine in your mind if it continues that pattern because that's what you've been taught. And it really takes you stepping outside of that to break away from that and to begin that healing. But yes, thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. And just before we end the recording part of it, because I want this part recorded, just to talk about prevention a little bit. So I'm going to speak with each of you. We'll start with Derek, because I know his might be a little, I don't want to say, what's the word? There's a word for it that's not coming to mind, but let's talk about on your end with spanking. So I'm at a family reunion and I see Uncle Bob spanking. Like, how do you approach the fact that you now, like we are now wise, we understand spanking is bad, spanking is abuse. How do you break and talk about that with family?
Well, you see, that's why I have this giant heavy bag back here so I can practice okay, you can't do that. You can't use aggression to teach other people to not be aggressive. And it's not about logic at this point. Hitting our kids when we are Black is so tied to our identity, as Kimmy said earlier. It's so tied to our identity. That's what shows us that we're not like the white folk. That's what we have. So I am very inflammatory. I don't know if that's the word you were looking for, but I am very inflammatory. Controversial. I am very inflammatory when I am on my social media spaces, because I know that they will that people that need to hear this message, I don't mean to say they, but that will never hear it from me and respect me, because they just won't. Like, it's too hard for them. So I am purposefully inflammatory. I want them to be mad at me so that they go find someone else to talk to about it. Like, that's what I want. I'm not gonna be that. I can't. I don't have the patience or the Netflix show. But what I would say is when you are dealing with someone like that in your family, first, you have to understand your family dynamics, the hierarchy. If you are a nephew or a niece going to talk to uncle, he's not going to listen by virtue of the power dynamic. So I am someone, people call this manipulative. I just think it shows how I learned to solve problems creatively as a child. What I would suggest is that you get, I love this woman. A copy of Dr. Stacy Patton's book, Spare the Child, and just take it with you when you go to those events. Have it out, leave it on the table somewhere, read through it. But if you go and get upset with that parent, I'm just telling you, I'm a living witness. They're just going to go home and take it out on the kid. They are. You're just going to have to find times where when they say they feel bad about it, I know you feel like you're being emotionally manipulative. No, they're being convicted. Press them a little bit when they tell you about it. Because I know every single person that spanks that, I believe this in my heart, there comes a time where they feel bad about it. They really do. They lay in, because I've met them before. They lay in bed thinking, that's why I had too many video games. I'm going to finish up. So what I'm saying is when they show an opportunity or an interest in change, go there. But you're not going to change their mind by shouting at them, but look, I'm doing it for you. It's not working. Like you're not gonna change their mind that way. Build a relationship with them. And when they come to you, have resources available for them so they can go get them. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I love that. And Senator Pinkney, you mentioned when you were speaking earlier as well that children want to protect their parents. You know, they'll say whatever lie you tell them to because they want to protect their parents. But let's say you suspect that there is abuse going on. How can we get the child to open up more or trust us more so that we can get them to have that conversation?
Nyemade, thank you for that question. Before I answer that, do you mind? I turned my camera off earlier because I love books. So I had to like run and get a book that spoke to the topic. And so it kind of piggybacks off what Derek just said, and it hits our topic. So I would love to get this part on the camera before we stop the recording, and then I'm happy to answer that. So shameless plug for Bell Hooks. She is everything. This is her book, All About Love. And All About Love. There, he must have read All About Love. I saw that face. This book is a game changer, and it really does talk about love in every aspect of the ways that we encounter it. And one of the chapters is childhood love lessons. And I want to just read a paragraph really quick from Belle, who is wise beyond years. One of the most important social myths we must debunk if we are to become a more loving culture is the one that teaches parents that abuse and neglect can coexist with love. Abuse and neglect negate love. Care and affirmation, the opposite of abuse and humiliation, are the foundation of love. No one can rightfully claim to be loving when behaving abusively, yet parents do this all the time in our culture. Children are told that they are loved even though they are being abused. It is a testimony to the failure of a loving practice that abuse is happening in the first place.
Yep.
Shameless plug for Belle. But
I'm gonna and Annie put it in the chat as well, but that's so true. And I think we just don't really think about it from that viewpoint. Because even me, like my first conversation with Derek, I was like, well, there's some spanking that's okay, and then there's, abuse. And he was like, no, it's all hitting, it's all abuse. So I'm like, oh. And then we talked about it. And so now I'm like, it's all abuse. But yeah, that she puts it in such a great way. I'm definitely gonna check it out.
Shameless plug. She took me there, so now I forgot what your question was. I'm so sorry.
My question was getting kids to open up about abuse if you suspect it going on.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And that I think is another one that can be difficult because different things work for different people. But I think one of the most important things that we can do is be a safe space for a child. Be a safe and trusting space for a child. So know the first conversation that you have with that baby is not going to be, hey, are you being abused? Like that's not, that's not going to be the first conversation that you have, but pay attention to them. Quiet as it's kept, kids can't hold water. They want to tell it all most of the time anyway. And so if you create a loving space, a nurturing space, and you listen, and really, really listen, and don't listen to respond, but listen to hear what they have to say, that child will come to you in some kind of way. And it may not be outright. It may not be daddy hits me, mommy hits me, Uncle Bobby touches me. It may not be that way, but it may be, you may see them shying away from Uncle Bobby when Uncle Bobby comes around. You may see them, sometimes you can literally see a child growing small. And explore that with them. And also one of the things that I always thought was truly amazing is the power of play therapy. If you watch children when they play, a lot of what they experience throughout their life is shown right off in that playing. This is I guess a way to make the conversation light. I saw on social media at one point, there was this baby she was talking to her baby doll, and she was telling the baby, she was like, you know what? I do not want to play with you anymore. You don't listen. I've had enough. And put that baby down and say, I've had enough because you don't listen. That baby has heard that somewhere before. And it is absolutely hilarious, but the baby has heard it somewhere before. And if we listen to those things, most often children will tell us what's going on. Just be a safe and listening ear, because most of the time kids just want to be heard. We as adults overpower children so much that we don't give them the room to talk and tell us what's going on. And a lot of the times if we do, they will.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's funny that you mentioned that the playing, because there's someone I'm a TikTok addict, for those who don't know, addicted to TikTok. There's someone that I follow who works at a preschool, and he's always saying, like, your kids tell all your business with their games. And they really do, because they will have these situations like, did you pay the bills, and blah, blah, blah. And that's all from their family and what they're seeing and hearing at home, good and bad. And so, Niagia, what are some preventative measures that we can take in regards to child abuse, besides just seeing it and reacting on the opposite side?
So we do our prevention. We do primary prevention, where we work with or talk to parents, adults, just general adults in the community. But we also do prevention with kids. And like, as Derek and Senator Pinkney were talking about, the things like, allowing a child to say no, and teaching them those kinds of things, like those are some of the things that we do. We talk to kids about their bodies and touches, and the different kinds of touches, and how it's okay to say no to touches, how to say no to touches. We also talk to them about having safe people. Like Senator Pinkney said, it's important for them to know that there are adults who they can go to and talk to. And not when it's abuse, but even before it gets there, when you are uncomfortable with, Uncle Johnny coming over, even before, because often when abuse happens, and I'm thinking specifically about sexual abuse, it doesn't go from 0 to 60. There are a lot of little things that happen before you get to the full-on abuse. And so it's important I'm sorry?
Is it in grooming?
Yes, exactly. And so it's important for kids to know, you don't have to wait until someone is putting their hands in your underwear to say something. You can say something when they're touching your shoulder and you don't like it very much, or they're always wanting to be alone with you, or they're always, saying things to kind of make you feel uncomfortable. We talk about that feeling and how to react. Stop what you're doing, listen to your body, and then do something. But on the other side of that, we don't want kids to be responsible for them not being abused. We know that it starts with the adults. Like, it's important for adults to take the responsibility to not abuse kids. So when it comes to that prevention part, we talk to adults about, like I said, kids saying no, and then adults accepting no. Like Derek said, that's a sentence. No, that's it. And also helping adults to understand that there are, we do foster parent training. And so in our foster parent training, when we talk about spanking, we talk about the spectrum, and how there's someone who says, if you put your hand on a child, period, that's abuse. And then there's someone who says, well, okay, you can put your hand, but just don't hit them more than 3 times. And then there's someone else, okay, well, you can hit them 3 times, but just make sure, you just leave, just a fleeting mark, as long as it's not there a week later, it's okay. And so no, and because when someone goes to hit a child, they're not hitting a child when they're happy. They're not hitting a child when everything is all rainbows and butterflies. They're hitting a child because they're angry, they're sad, they're disappointed, they're, all these other emotions that are increasing the heaviness of the hand, or increasing the heaviness of the belt, or whatever they're using. So talking to adults about understanding that there are things that can be done instead of, you don't have to hit, just like you don't want the child to hit their brother or sister, you don't hit them, and that's the beginning. You know, you are a model for the kids in your life. And so as a model, you know, you do to them or do to other people what you want them to do. And so, so for prevention, again, we talk about how it's important to understand that there are a lot of times in abuse and different realms, people always talk about risk factors. And so one of the things that we try to do is we try to look at protective factors, because risk factors, when you mention that, people are like, oh no, that's not me. Oh no, I'm not a single parent. Oh no, we're not, you know, low income. Oh no, you know, so people are very quick to say, oh no, when it comes to risk factors. And so we talk about protective factors and how there are things in, you know, that any family could benefit from: having social connections, having their needs met, having some parental resilience, having people who, you know, who are healthy relationships that you interact with and things like that. So kind of building on those things can be a prevention of child abuse. And it's helpful to look at protective factors, because then people, like, I work for Prevent Child Abuse Delaware. So when people hear that, they're like, oh, oh, do you, you know, and I don't want people to have that reaction. So sometimes I'll say, oh yeah, and we have a Strengthening Families program. And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, what's, you know, and then they want to hear, they want to talk about it. So talking to people and from a strengths perspective, that can sometimes open up their ears and open up their minds to hear what you have to say, and not necessarily saying this is going to prevent abuse, but this is how you can build your family. This is how you can keep kids safe. This is how you can, you know, teach personal safety in general to kids, not just that you may hurt them, but for anyone who may hurt them, kind of thing. So we try to do that, you know, kind of sneak it in the back door instead of just saying this is preventing child abuse, because people, unfortunately, they don't want to hear that.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's some really great tips and advice. And it's nice to know that you do more than just on like when things are bad, but on the end of strengthening things as well.
Mm-hmm.
So for right now, what we're going to do is end the recording sessions. Don't go away though, because we've had some interesting comments in the